Bring to us your poetry from inspiration sought. Come join us with your images, your verses, words, and thought. From here, we'll share your balladry with those who do not know it. This platform here for you to show the world that you're the poet.
Welcome to episode 2 of You're the Poet, the poetry podcast featuring you. I'm host Matt Bergio, and I'm here with co host Phil Bergio. Phil, welcome.
Thank you.
First off, thank you to everyone who listened to episode 1, our pilot episode. We know this is a work in progress and appreciate your support as we build the You're the Poet community. Here at You're the Poet, our purpose is to share our love of poetry with the world and invite you to do the same. If you've written any poetry and you want to share it here, whether you just have an interest in poetry, consider yourself an amateur poet, or are a professional poet with published works, contact us to be a guest on a future episode. Please check out the website at you'rethepoet.com, follow us on Facebook for updates and info, and send us an email to host@you'rethepoet.com for feedback or questions about the podcast and how to be our next guest. Today, we're happy to feature our first guest on You're the Poet, Chris Burns. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right, Chris. Well, thanks for being with us, and we will get to you later in the podcast. First, we're going to start with what we call our classics, poems that are already out there that we like and enjoy. And I'm going to turn it over to Phil Bergio to share with us what he has brought to the table today.
Okay, last podcast, we did a Robert Frost poem. And this week I'm doing an Emily Dickinson poem. And the connection is a Paul Simon song. He mentions both poets in one of his songs, and I thought this would be appropriate. Angels in the early morning may be seen the dews among, stooping, plucking, smiling, flying. Do the buds to them belong? Angels when the sun is hottest may be seen the sands among, stooping, plucking, sighing, flying. Parch the flowers they bear along. That's Emily Dickinson poem.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. Now, for the next segment, I don't have a whole lot to say about that. Dad, other than the Paul Simon connection, was there anything you wanted to say about that poem?
No, it just it might be appropriate because my poem is going to be about gardening and things like that, the outdoors.
Okay. Nice. Well, thank you for sharing. For my poem this week, I'm going to share a poem that I wrote as a teenager. This is when I really started writing as an adult. I know I wrote some poetry as a child, but when I really started thinking about poetry and being like, I'm going to write some poetry, I believe it was my junior year of high school. And it started with a poetry assignment we had to do on the ballad form. And so I did that assignment. But then, even after the assignment, I decided, I'm going to continue writing some poetry. And so I wrote a series of ballads. And I'll admit that throughout my life, most of my poetry probably falls into the ballad form. And so the one I'm going to share today, called Of Myself I Know Not, follows that form. Although looking at it, the I ams and the syllables and things don't exactly line up. The rhyme scheme is there, but it's a little irregular in terms of syllables and such. But I feel like it does have a flow. And so this is one of those poems where, as a teenager, you question a lot of things, whether it's about love, whether it's about whatever. And so this is one I wrote to start that off, and it's called Of Myself I Know Not. Who am I? I ask myself as the hours pass on by. But the answer will not come to me, regardless how I try. Provoked by silent lashings, my mind whirls about and cries. It ponders past and present, believing all the lies. True identity will not show through all the misty fog. In murky shadows it must lie like monsters in a bog. I search and search to find a way to unmask the troubled thought, but content it is to stay within the barrier it wrought. Locked away it will remain, bound by blissful hope, this hope that always burdens me, with which I'll learn to cope. Then it all comes clear to me, the answer it jumps out, for it's this bound hope inside of me that I'm all about. Matthew Bergio. So that was the first poem that really kicked off my poetry writing in high school, back on the old Compaq Presario computer that I bought that year, and that I finally had my own bedroom and I had my own computer. And so I would stay up late and write some poetry, typically thinking about girls and, being the hopeless romantic. So that kind of started things off for me.
That was nice. That was impressive. The couplets were nice. the alliteration, the internal rhymes, they were all lovely with the music of it.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, it's always a work in progress. I know as I've read through my poems over the years, not all of them flow and everything, but I've always liked that one. That's kind of been like my sort of like my flagship poem for myself.
Mhm.
All right, so Phil, I'm going to turn it back to you to read one of your poems that you have written, and you can say some things about that.
Okay, this is kind of a prophetic poem because I wrote it in 1980 and I've seen the change in my area since then. The poem is called Country Peace. I love the country, the rural spots of peace, the spring life buds, summer sun and heat, the beauty of autumn hues, winter tranquility. I enjoy the solitude, so quiet a smile is heard. I enjoy the black earth, the blue sky, and as I sit and contemplate in what I have, I pray that progress does not progress too fast. I'll enjoy the country while I can and have peace in knowing I once heard myself smile.
Very nice.
All right, thank you. That's a poem that comes to mind for me a lot, especially around here, is I feel like progress is progressing too fast. And I always think about that line of the poem because it's getting crazy here from what we used to live in a rural area to now. I was irritated the other day waiting to turn into my dad's driveway and having to wait for 6 cars to go by. And I was like, this never happens. I was like, when I was a kid, you'd be lucky if you saw 1 or 2 cars come down the street, and usually you knew who they were.
This was
Was
1980.
that
I wrote this one.
Sunday church traffic?
It might have been. I don't remember.
No,
But it's just getting crazy around here as things get built up. So, well,
we're,
thank you
we're
for
fortunate that our side of the road is fairly rural, and the houses they're building on the other side of the road are like acres. They have at least minimum of 3 acres. It's not subdivision. That's north of us. But I once heard myself smile.
Yeah, thank you for sharing
Mhm.
that. All right, Chris, this is where you come into play. Again, Chris Burns, our first guest here on You're the Poet. So, Chris, you're the poet. Show us what you've got.
Okay, thank you. Little backstory. I started writing in high school to cope with the angst of, growing up. I took it more serious when I started going to college. I took about I took 3 creative writing classes. A poetry class was part of that, and then also how to break down poetry. That was fun because our instructor was a smartass. Don't
Nice.
remember his name, but he made the class enjoyable. People who have inspired me, E. E. Cummings, he's greatly inspired me. I love his usage of like negative space, of just the nonsense of it and making sense of nonsense, I guess, to somebody who's a beginner or unaware of the devices that he uses to express his art. Is It kind of comes off as nonsensical, but it also helps that you learn that it's either about religion or sex. So once you learn that, then you're like, oh, okay. He mentioned apple, it's got to be Adam and Eve.
What I
William
always like,
Shakespeare. Oh,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was gonna say what I always liked about Cummings is that he doesn't really worry about capitalization or punctuation, and I'm always like, I always find sometimes that's the most difficult thing when I'm doing my poetry is where do you put the comma, where do you put the semicolon, and all that. And I was like, man, Cummings had that right. He just sort of wrote it and didn't worry about that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
forget about it.
so William Shakespeare. I just see his content, and I haven't written because my content starts becoming repetitive. So that's one thing I feel like dry for inspiration because I just keep using the same devices, and it gets boring for me to reread and edit. Anna Akhmatova, I've enjoyed her poetry. She's had some. It's like she's kind of sarcastic about depression and about Russia and about the gray that she lives in and the climate and all that. So I found it kind of like tongue in cheek humorous, especially when she had a brief fling with Boris Pasternak. Pasternak.
Or
They had a
pastor,
brief
whatever.
thing. So they were taking jabs at each other through their poetry, and I found that was pretty funny.
Nice.
But Rumi, I enjoy to read because you understand where it's going and you start to connect with it, and then he just turns it upside down, and you're left with wonderment. You're like, what in the tarnation? But to go in this that I wrote, this is the only piece that I've had published, and one of the things is why I haven't published anymore is because going through the editing process and finding that content that not encouraging once you start seeing the redundancies. But the other thing too was just I felt so vulnerable that I'm just afraid to publish again. This was about 22, 23. Just generally about the frustrations of dating and learning and all that. It's titled, Why Must I Love a Winged Thing? Why must I love this siren? Enticed by her tight clothes, too. A dream that glides across the sky. Mountain top here is not cold. As I embrace her warm heart and face, our passion grows with passing time, and we climb to close cloud, allowing lust to lead our way. Breaths match like in and out, our bed of silken feathers. Pick the gold locks away from eyes, we touch lips with sensuous kiss. Herein I know I've been deceived. Moment of truth with one thought adored begins to slip on clouds sway and shift. I fall to earth. She tears my fate. Resistance in the shape of reddened gaze. Letting go as I know nature parts me. Landing now, recognize that folly was mine. I swear not ever to fall again, never to fall for an enchanted thing. Chris Burns.
All right. Thank you for sharing.
It was good. I like that.
Are you still there, Chris?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm taking some breaths because yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you for sharing. Man, there's a lot going on there. First of all, I love the title. I think that's a great title for the poem.
It sounded a very 19th century title, which is a good thing in my opinion.
Yeah. And then no, it's a lot of good imagery there. I like how you kind of invoked that feeling of you can kind of tell what the person's going through with the imagery there. And you said not deprive you don't want to, but what phase of your life was this in? You say you were was this like you said in the 20s?
Yeah, like 22, 21 to 23 years old, I think is when it was written.
Okay. Nice. And you said this was a published work?
Yes, it's in the International Library of Poetry. The collection is called Collected Whispers.
Okay. Nice.
I'm publishing a book like that.
Yeah, I think I've got some. I don't know if it's that specific company of poetry collections, but I think I've got a poem in one of those types of collections as well.
The poem I wrote, I read last podcast. That's in there. Chris, you got another poem for us?
Oh gosh.
The answer can be no if that's
Yeah.
you're just not
No,
comfortable.
no, I don't. No.
Okay,
Okay,
just
no.
give me the opportunity. You come back as a guest another time too.
Okay, cool. I'll dig through something. I'll find in my unedited works.
Matt was telling me I'm gonna have to start writing more poetry because I'll run out.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
I'm-
because we're trying to read one every episode, so like, depending on how this
Yeah.
takes off, I have to keep up with it.
Got a bunch of haiku. I can always slap one of those on there. I like
Nice.
haiku. I like haiku.
I went through a zombie haiku phase. I think I wrote 10 of them. They are so awesome.
I'll lay in bed and do a haiku in my head. Never write it down. Forget about it. But
Yeah.
it's
Do
like
you
doodling.
try to write a true haiku or do you vary
575.
Okay. Was one of the original writers, he did deviate. He was along the same lines as William Shakespeare, not believing to write for the true form because after a while it gets boring.
Yeah, but
And
I look at it. It's kind of like a challenge.
Oh
Gotta-
yeah.
I always felt like I struggled with haiku, and I think it stemmed from it being a kid and like, trying to come up with the syllables. It's always like using words like "oh, what a flower," or trying to kind of like nonsense
Oh.
words in the flow, not being like really good for
And
the
for
poem.
good haiku, the last line has to tie the other two together. It just can't be frivolous.
Right.
Mhm.
We're talking about in the future maybe doing a whole episode dedicated to the haiku, so we may do that in the future. All right, well, I think we'll wrap it up from here. Chris, again, thanks for coming on and being our first guest on You're the Poet. Please check this episode out. It should be published here soon.
Thank you very much. It has been an honor and a pleasure as I need to access this creative outlet more.
It's great.
Yeah,
And the dinner invitation stands.
Yes.
yeah, definitely. And same with me. I thought, doing this podcast, helped kind of inspire me and get me writing again because I too have hit a dry spell and I'm kind of trying to find inspiration again. So I feel you there.
I need it too because I've been depressed lately.
Hey, no, depression can be a source. So we were just talking about that the other day. But anyway, thank you. Thanks again for listening to our audience. Please check us out at you'rethepoet.com. You can find us on Facebook, and you can listen to these podcasts in a variety of places, including Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and other places that podcasts can be found. If you have any comments or questions about the podcast, or you want to give us some feedback about this episode, send us an email to host@you'rethepoet.com and check us out. Again, I'm Matt Bergio, the host of You're the Poet. And thank you, Phil, my co-host, and we'll see you again next week.
Chris, nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you, Phil.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.